Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Content Patch for the 10th of November 2014. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Blizzard announces its first new IP in 17 years, Rockstar retroactively strips content from the Steam version of San Andreas, and indie company Digital Homicide issues a false DMCA claim to censor criticism. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. This year's BlizzCon was a big one for Blizzard Entertainment, as the unexpected announcement of a brand new IP, not in fact based on any of their famous three franchises, caught many people by surprise. The new game from Blizzard will be named Overwatch, and it appears to be a hero-driven, team-based first-person shooter. According to interviews with Blizzard, the game itself came from the failed MMO Titan that they'd been developing for years and was just recently announced as cancelled. It had long been speculated that Titan was some sort of first-person MMO. However, Chris Metzen at BlizzCon described it as 6 video games in one, and a giant big idea that they just couldn't figure out. After a lengthy cinematic trailer played at BlizzCon, the game was actually playable on the show floor and gameplay footage was put out to the public. They've announced that a beta will begin in January of 2015. Well, this was a surprise for quite a lot of people, but I have some disclosure to make before I talk any more about this. As many of you are probably aware, I run a StarCraft 2 esports team, which means that I am directly connected to Blizzard through their esports department, as I have to talk to them on a fairly regular basis for professional reasons. As a result, I would consider at least a couple of people on the team to be friends, and there is some crossover between the StarCraft 2 esports team and some of the other departments within Blizzard. That means that there is a possibility that anything I say about Blizzard games could therefore be colored, and you should consider all of my opinions regarding Blizzard and their games within that context. Alright, now we've got that out of the way. So this thing looks reasonably interesting, I've got to say. It is a first-person shooter, obviously, which is exciting to me in and of itself. I do love my FPS, I do love my competitive FPS, and my team-focused FPS to some degree. I've got to say that lately I have certainly been digging the idea of individual skill mattering perhaps more than teamwork, and there are certain games that focus on that, and there are certain games that do not. Overwatch is quite clearly an objective-focused team-based first-person shooter. They've revealed a couple of game modes for it so far, none of which are particularly original. I'm hoping that they innovate on this. So they have Payload, which is move the payload to the delivery point. Yeah, we've had that before. It's an EMP device. It's very similar to the way that Team Fortress 2 did that particular mode. And Point Capture, which is frankly exactly what you would expect. And they also unveiled a couple of maps, King's Row, the Temple of Anubis, and Hanamura, which are all based in different areas of their particular spin on the real world. They've also unveiled a number of, I wouldn't say classes, because what they've got is a hero-focused first-person shooter, meaning that each hero, based on its abilities and kit, can effectively be its own class, but they fall into 4 basic roles: offense, defense, tank, and support. In a similar style to Dota, each of these heroes has an ultimate ability. For instance, a hero by the name of Reaper has an ability called Death Blossom. In a blur of motion, Reaper empties both his Hellfire shotguns at breakneck speed, dealing massive damage to all nearby enemies. His kit involves the Hellfire twin shotguns, as I mentioned, and he has the ability to go into Wraith form, where he takes no damage and is able to pass through enemies but can't fire his weapons. And he also has a Shadow Step. After marking a destination, Reaper disappears and reappears at that location. Indeed, it would appear that the majority of classes seem to have a movement-focused ability alongside an ultimate. For instance, Reinhardt has a charge, which, needless to say, also collides with enemies and does damage, but also has a bunch of other abilities like Rocket Hammer, Shield, and Fire Strike, with his ultimate being Earth Shatter. Winston, who is a giant armored ape of some description, has a jump pack. We saw Widowmaker with a grappling hook. Everyone seems to have their own relatively unique movement-focused ability, as well as a bunch of other stuff. So you're mixing a basic kit, fairly similar to TF2, with a bunch of Dota-style abilities. Not the first game to do it. I'd say this is fairly comparable to the way that Monday Night Combat and Super Monday Night Combat worked. Closer to Monday Night Combat, though, because Super Monday Night Combat went a little bit too far down the Dota route, whereas Monday Night Combat said, hey, yeah, you also have abilities in addition to your weapons, and you can improve those over time. Now, Overwatch doesn't seem to do that. Based on the gameplay that was put out there at BlizzCon, you do have an ultimate, but you build up a power meter in order to activate it. Outside of that, you can't upgrade your abilities in the game. There doesn't appear to be any sort of economy or anything along those lines, and that's why some calling this an FPS MOBA seem to be completely missing all of the characterizing mechanics behind a Dota-style game. Now, there is no creep farming, there is no economy, there don't appear to be any in-game levels as far as I can tell. The progression system, I imagine, would be based outside of the game rather than inside each individual match. And right now, at any rate, it plays a bit like Team Fortress 2 in terms of its objectives, and you have abilities like, say, Firefall and Monday Night Combat, which to me sounds totally fine. I can certainly see a desire to do that and perhaps detach from the notion that you get to heavily customize a character and instead just put in more characters that have different themes and a different kit based around them, and that could end up adding some interesting diversity to the title. I do wonder what level of customization will be available. I mean, if we look at Team Fortress 2, of course, you can customize not only the appearance of the characters, but also the weapons that they can use. According to the panel, so far they don't have one, and they don't think that one would actually fit either, so there won't be any in-match leveling system, or indeed, as far as we can tell, out-of-match leveling system, but I imagine there's got to be something tied into the business model involving unlocking characters with some sort of currency. That's assuming that this thing doesn't get released as a full-price game, which seems highly unlikely, just based on the current market. It's not the sort of thing that you generally see, and the class-based gameplay does seem to open up the very real possibility of a free-to-play model, although simultaneously, of course, you can run into problems with that based on balance and based on the level of access that players have to particular hero classes. Blizzard's certainly gone down the free-to-play route of late, and I'm not 100% convinced by their free-to-play business model at the moment. I don't mind Hearthstone because it's a collectible card game, and frankly, you expect that kind of model for that, but Heroes of the Storm probably could innovate a little bit more, and frankly is not doing a brilliant job of convincing me on its business model. I don't mind paying for cosmetics, that's fine, but I have a feeling that those that play it free are going to be highly limited as a result of having a limited hero pool that they can actually play. And of course, that runs into similar problems with other games where you have a weekly rotation where you see too much of one hero, and that can get a little bit boring as well. So I think the business model is probably the biggest sticking point. As long as the mechanics are good and as long as the game's enjoyable with enough modes and great map design, then I have no doubt that I'll want to play it. But business model questions do linger, no doubt about that. The other thing I want to know is how well will this thing run? Heroes of the Storm currently does not run well at all because it uses the StarCraft engine, which is too bloody old and only supports 2 cores. It doesn't run well on anything. Even my brand new machine still has problems with frame rate when it comes to StarCraft 2 and Heroes of the Storm. And there's no PC in existence that doesn't when you're playing on Ultra. So I certainly hope that whatever engine they were developing for Titan is advanced enough to properly support modern hardware, because if it's not, well, if I run into a first-person shooter where I can't maintain 60 frames per second, then frankly I stop playing that game. I've always said in regards to Blizzard that they make games that run on everything but don't run on anything particularly well. And I stick to that to this very day, frankly. So hopefully this thing will be worth playing. It looks like it. I mean, the trailer was very impressive, and it seems like they've got a good, solid, unified design, and they understand where they're going with the mechanics, and we don't actually have that many shooters like this. I know a lot of people have been very reductive and said, hey, it's Team Fortress 3. Well, it's kind of team-based, but let's not compare every team-focused first-person shooter to Team Fortress 2. That would be fallacious, but whatever it's got, it seems pretty reasonable so far. But I think it does need a good selection of modes, good selection of characters, and a little bit of innovation in that regard. Because so far, in terms of the game modes, from what I'm seeing, and of course this is very early, well, they're identical to other games like Team Fortress 2. So let's see something a little different. Rockstar has, quote, updated, unquote, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas on Steam, and unfortunately, it has resulted in the game being objectively worse. Not only did they manage to break old saved files, but they also managed to re-break the 1920 by 1080 resolution. Originally, San Andreas didn't support this. They then updated it and fixed it, and now it's been broken again. They've also added some ludicrous things like making steering with mouse enabled by default, which is hilarious because I don't know of a single person that ever used that, and it seems like a terrible idea. But they've also cut out several songs. Now, this is a similar thing that they did to the mobile version, and indeed it would appear that a lot of this update is as a direct result of that. This means that those that bought San Andreas now have objectively less content in their game than they did when they first purchased it. This is an emerging consumer rights problem as far as I'm concerned. It seems to be very much bound to outdated copyright laws and the way that licensing works for third-party soundtracks. Games like Grand Theft Auto are particularly vulnerable to this because they use fully commercial music as opposed to actually getting music composed for their own game that they can then own. And there's of course an advantage to that because you get to roll around in your car and listen to commercial music on your radio, and that adds a feeling of authenticity. And of course the soundtracks to GTA have been frequently lauded as being fantastic selections of popular music. Simultaneously, it also means that it's going to cost them a damn fortune, and whenever licensing issues come up, they are required to start to strip that music out. Now, this didn't used to be a problem when we were dealing simply with physical media, but now, since we've gone digital, these updates can be pushed on you without your knowledge, and indeed without your consent, through your online client, and retroactively content can be removed from the game, and as we noticed, it can also break certain parts of it. Now, this to me, again, seems like a huge consumer rights issue because you didn't buy Grand Theft Auto San Andreas without those 17 tracks. They have removed 17 tracks from that game. The product is no longer the complete product that you first purchased. Now, you can go back and forth on updates and say, well, I didn't want them to make this change, but they changed it, so well, I should get a refund. And, well, there's a certain reality that I think we all have to deal with when it comes to games that are frequently updated online. Sometimes a change is going to be made that we don't like. But most of the time that's subjective, like, say, a balance change to a weapon or a redesign of a map. This isn't that. This is objectively removing content from the game and objectively breaking parts of it that worked in the first place. And as far as I'm concerned, you should be entitled to a refund in those circumstances. And I would speculate that under EU law, you probably are. European Union courts have already ruled on the idea of getting refunds for digital copies, and they have said, look, we don't care about your ridiculous end-user license agreement. No, they're not renting from you. They bought this. They're entitled to a refund under consumer rights law. Now, in the US, this may very well not be the case, but with this emerging issue and the fact that this kind of stuff is happening more and more, it seems to me that the law needs to catch up. And until it does, the burden must fall upon the retailer and those that actually have the power to fight for the rights of their customers. And make no mistake, that's exactly what they are. When I say that Valve should take more responsibility for consumer protection, I genuinely mean that because they are in a position of almost complete market dominance on PC, and they have a responsibility. We can't fix this. This is not something that the consumer can do anything about. Outside, of course, making our voice heard and protesting to the best of our ability. This really is the sort of thing that Valve could put pressure on publishers and developers to stop. Will they? Well, probably not. Valve has not shown pro-consumer behavior over the last few years. They have not really shown an interest in having a progressive refund policy, and in fact have been completely outstripped by companies like EA with Origin, if you can believe it, and of course CD Projekt with GOG. Steam's refund and consumer protection policies are some of the worst in the industry. This is a company that still frequently promotes unfinished games and has no problem with that being the case, and it refuses to punish companies which do not keep their promises. This is a company that will willingly sell games that simply don't work on a large number of platforms because they didn't bother to patch or fix them, and they're still on sale to this very day. In fact, it's a very rare thing indeed to see Valve remove any game from the Steam store, unless, of course, the developer threatens the death of Gabe Newell. Yeah, this is going to be a problem going forward. Something has got to be done about it, and of course I feel that legislation needs to be updated to cover this particular situation. And finally, we have yet another insane developer on the horizon. Joining the illustrious ranks of Wild Game Studios, fun creators, and those behind Island Light, we have Imminent Uprising, also known as Digital Homicide LLC's title, The Slaughtering Grounds, who have issued a DMCA claim against Jim Sterling's critique of the first 10 or so minutes of their game. This follows the developer throwing a tantrum on the Steam page after this happened, and posting a reply video using Jim Sterling's original video and pasting subtitles over it, calling Jim Sterling a fucking idiot over and over and over again. This spawned an amusing call and response between the two video creators, and it seems eventually that after subsequent humiliation, the developer went all out and issued a DMCA claim. Now, of course, this DMCA claim was issued through the YouTube copyright system. This is not an official DMCA notice, although the system is inextricably tied to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act's laws, and it allows almost any developer to strike down a video that they don't like practically instantly based on very, very shaky copyright grounds with no regard whatsoever to fair use and the protection of critique. And worse still, it doesn't even involve the filing of an official DMCA notice, which of course have guilty until proven innocent laws and require almost immediate compliance from the host in order to maintain their safe harbor protection. YouTube's system actually goes far further than the DMCA actually requires, and their response time when getting these things cleared up is by no means any good. But let's be frank, the fault clearly lays on the head of the developer of the slaughtering grounds. The claim was filed by James O. Ramin Jr. at Digital Homicide LLC, and it seems that the company is not only incapable of dealing with criticism of their shoddy product, but they're also incapable of following the law, and indeed, false DMCA claims are actually made under the penalty of perjury. So just bear that in mind. From this man's rather experienced viewpoint, I'd say that they need to change their name to Digital Suicide LLC, because that's exactly what happens every time an indie dev like this throws their toys out of the pram and decides to abuse the law in order to take down critique. It doesn't matter how unfair you think the criticism is. That is not the way to deal with it. You don't get to censor things you don't like. It is inherently anti-consumer to even consider the notion that a developer could take down criticism of their product simply by abusing copyright law in order to do it. That is ludicrous. Thankfully, for the most part, it's only indie developers that are stupid enough to actually engage in this. Large publishers and AAAs know the backlash that they would receive if they even attempted to do such things. So, strangely enough, as many ethical concerns as we might have with publishers and AAAs, this particular abuse of the copyright system is certainly not one of them. And needless to say, I believe that they should get what's coming to them, and I dearly hope that they attempt to pursue this in court. I really do. Because, of course, Jim Sterling is part of Polaris. Who owns Polaris? Disney. I hope you like being drowned in lawyers. Make no mistake, Mickey Mouse ain't got time for your bullshit. Alright, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like to give you another OC remix selection. Here's one that's a little bit less common than usual. From the 1989 release of Batman on the Nintendo Entertainment System, we have a remix of Stage 2, The Axis Chemical Factory. This is remixed by Midee, and he describes it as having a bit of the original Batman TV theme, 007-esque bass VI guitar, 70s cop chase elements, and a cocktail of MIDI brass. Bam, kapow, sock. Enjoy it and download it in the description below this video for free, and I'll see you next time.